We have finally made it. This is our last installment of our Genesis Bible study, and it has been an absolute blast. And so we are going to kind of do a more of a summary over these last few chapters, just because of you don't want to be sitting here and watching an hour-long video. And so just for the sake of not overcomplicating things and for being respectful of your time, I'm not going to be doing a deep dive into our last chapters. We're going to be doing more of a summary. That way we're caught up. And then I want to ask you to go ahead and read through these chapters yourself and maybe even do a little more research than what I'm going to do. And so again, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, or else this would be a very long video. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to chapter 49. So chapter 48, we have Jacob. Basically, this is the starting point of him preparing for his death. And so he asks Joseph to bring his two sons to him. And he essentially adopts the sons and blesses them. A large part of this being that his firstborn they defiled their positions, and so I think a large part of this is Jacob kind of making up for the lack of his own children by adopting Joseph's children into the tribes. And so we're going to go ahead and go straight to 49. And we're not going to cover all of 49. What I am going to do, though, is highlight some major points. So 49 is basically Jacob prophesying over each of his sons. And interestingly enough, this is our first introduction to human prophecy in the Bible. Before now, it has been all prophecy and revelation has been coming from God himself. But this is our first insight into a human, that being Jacob, prophesying the future of his sons over them. And so, like I said, we're not going to do every single verse. I'm going to kind of hit a few highlights that I just want to cover just for the sake of connecting the stories. And then we'll be moving to chapter 50 and we'll be done. So, 49, 1 through 2. And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. So this is kind of a last significant act. And what's interesting is if you start in 48 and go through 50, we get one of the most complex but best outlooks at the death of a family member, that being Jacob. So you're not going to really find anywhere else in the Bible 3 chapters devoted to the death of a specific character, and it really covering pretty much the majority of the elements and the burial processes that they went through. And so it's really an interesting outlook into how they handled Jacob's burial and the amount of respect and honor that he received from it. And just from a cultural standpoint, seeing how the process worked for them compared to what we do today in our society. And so he says, Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. And I'm pretty sure we've all noticed this, but remember, he was given the name Israel from God himself. And however, that name kind of goes back and forth throughout all the chapters after he is named Israel. So I think we kind of almost have it's almost like a double personality. You have Jacob and Israel, and they're all fighting in conflict with each other. And while I'm kind of making a joke of that, that's essentially the essence that we find here is Jacob himself owning that. You are the sons of Jacob, but listen to Israel, your father. So don't listen to Jacob in this moment. Listen to Israel, that who is ordained from God. And that's where he jumps straight to Reuben, his firstborn. So 3 through 4. So Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. It sounded pretty good so far. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So it started out, Reuben's probably like, oh man, awesome. He's speaking so highly of me. And then he tells him, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed. Now, again, we've been going through all this chapter, so we've covered a lot of information. But he tells him that he defiled it. And if you can remember, Reuben slept with Bilhah. And that was a concubine of Jacob. So he defiled his father's bed by having sexual relations with Bilhah. And he just tells him, you're not going to excel. And from what we see is the tribe of Reuben does not excel. There is no prophet, no judge, and no king that we know of that comes from the tribe of Reuben. Now, 5 through 7, we cover Simon and Levi. And he tells them, Simon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Now, he specifically calls them instruments of cruelty. And again, we're going to go back to our previous story. And if we remember, Simon and Levi being called instruments of cruelty from when they wiped out all the men of Shechem in retaliation for the rape of their sister Dinah. And so this event, and if we remember, Jacob's reaction when this occurred was more self-centered and, oh, why do you got to make me look bad, and oh, woe is me. But at this point, he's telling them that their sin is one of the root causes of this prophecy, and that they are filled with anger out of their own self-will. And so, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce. I mean, these men murdered an entire city practically, and then they stole things and stole the women. I mean, it was an awful event, and they're finding this sin come back and bite them in the process. So 8 through 12, and now we're getting to Judah. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Now here's the really cool part. So Judah, he wasn't a completely exemplary character. Okay, so I mean, he had a profit motive from getting rid of Joseph. He also did not deal faithfully with his daughter-in-law Tamar. Because, he had sex with her as a prostitute. And however, I mean, he also showed a good character whenever he interceded and offered himself as a sacrifice in the place, as a substitute for Benjamin. But from this prophecy, if you ask yourself, which tribe did Jesus come from? Well, it was Judah. So in this prophecy, I think it's less about Judah than it is more about Jesus himself. And we also see the term lion come up a lot, and he talks about it as a lion and his scepter. And so in this prophecy, he's telling them, you're gonna be a ruling figure, and you're going to be like a lion, and we have the visions of Jesus come from this. In Revelation 5:5, Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But what I want to point out, though, is in the verses, Jacob says himself, "Until Shiloh comes." And Shiloh, after doing a lot of research, different research, most figures believe that Shiloh is the Messiah. So he's specifically telling Jacob, until our Savior comes. And that is his prophecy, is that you will be the tribe which the Savior of the world is going to come from. So now we're going to go ahead and jump over to Joseph, and that's 22 through 26. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong, by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb, the blessings of your father have excelled the blessing of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown, and on the head of him who is separate from his brothers. And so he says, the archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him, but his bow remained in strength. And at this point, he's just recognizing the fact that out of all the obstacles that Joseph has been through, that it was God who gave him the strength to overcome all of them. In fact, we see different titles for God listed in this, and it's the mighty God of Jacob, the shepherd, the stone of Israel, the God of your father, the Almighty. And basically it's Israel, or Jacob, whatever you want to call him, the revelation that all of this was because of God, and that Joseph is going to continually prosper because God has blessed him, and that God has put him in a position to save the family, and to bless them in unimaginable ways. And then we jump over to 27. It's Benjamin, and he doesn't have tons to say. He says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. And this tribe has had a reputation for their fierceness, and they're a pretty cruel tribe. And again, he calls them a ravenous wolf, and that is a perfect prophecy according to what will become of the tribe of Benjamin. 29 to 32. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, and the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. So Jacob, he says, I am to be gathered to my people. And it's this confidence that he has that he is going to be with his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham, living in an eternal state in heaven with them. But he asks his sons, he says, bury me with my fathers. He They're in Egypt, but he's not an Egyptian. He wants to be buried back in the promised land. And so that's what's going to happen. So 33. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. And so we finally have the death of Jacob. So let's go ahead and jump over to chapter 50. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. And so Jacob passes, and Joseph falls on his father's face. And it's this very deeply moving and dramatic scene that we're able to witness with the descriptions. And it says that Jacob was mourned for 70 days among the whole nation of Egypt. And so Jacob was obviously a very greatly honored man. So 4 through 6. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am dying, and my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you should bury me. Now therefore please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. And so we see Joseph's request confirmed from Pharaoh himself. And so 7 through 11. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. Then they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. And then when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. And so this is a dramatic burial. The entire clan gathered together to pay tribute to Jacob, the last link with the patriarchs. And they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. And it's this, and again, I said this earlier, but this is such a detailed process of the final days of Jacob and from his death to his burial that we get to witness in these chapters. So 12 through 14. So his sons did for him just as he has commanded them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who went up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all evil which we did to him. And it's such a hard left turn, but it was once the father had officially passed away and the mourning was over, the brothers again remembering their sins that they committed to Joseph, are back to go, back in this thought process of, oh, we did this, our father's gone now, so he's not going to witness any of this. This is Joseph's, a time to really retaliate against us. And so 16 through 18. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. And I tend to think that whenever they say, before your father died, he commanded. So they're putting words into Jacob's mouth. And I think it's a story that is made up. They didn't feel that they had the moral right to ask Joseph for mercy, since they sinned against him so greatly. So they put the request for mercy in the mouth of their honored and dead father, and assuming that it is a false story, which I truly do believe it is, such a awful thing to do after the death of their father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And I mean, after all this time, and how well Joseph has taken care of them, for them to doubt him like this had to have been just soul crushing. For them to be able to doubt his character. So 19 through 21. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about it as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And so Joseph is just reassuring them. He's saying, yes, you did evil, but I understand that God used this evil to put me in this position to save everybody, to save our family, to continue our lineage. And he reassures them to do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And just, again, the character of Joseph that we get to witness coming out of these events. I mean, he was in a position where he could have just lashed out in anger against them, but he spoke kindly to them. So 22 through 24. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so we get to see Joseph grow old and be able to see the children to the third generation. And he also, at the end, reassures him that God will bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Egypt was not their final resting place, but that it would be the promised land. 25 through 26. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And so Joseph was not put into a cave. He was placed into a coffin in Egypt. And he says that you shall carry up my bones from here. And if we go ahead and jump over to Exodus 13:19, it says that, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. For he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and he shall carry out my bones from here with you. And that is the end of Genesis.